This little cottage is the only building on Wrenton that I photographed all through the construction process. The pictures formed the basis of an article on the Engage Forum website and also appeared in the April 2019 issue of Railway Modeller. I start the build by drawing the outlines of the walls using Photoshop, adding grey rectangles to indicate the locations of the doors and windows. I like to have some foundations for my buildings which will be set into the scenic base. This avoids the unsightly gaps under the walls, so ground level is indicated as shown by the red lines. I make a print of the drawing and cut out and fold up a paper version of the building. If I'm happy with the result, the next job is to cut the walls from plasticard. My original method was to print the drawing on label paper, which I stuck to the card as a cutting guide. Now, though, I use a portrait silhouette machine. I import the Photoshop drawing into the Silhouette's software and trace over the lines that need to be cut. Here, I'm moving the drawing back under the traced lines. The machine chatters away and soon cuts along the lines. It doesn't get right through 20 thou. More powerful, more expensive machines probably would, but it does score deeply enough to make final cutting out easy. I start by removing the door and window openings, cutting diagonals from each corner and snapping out the resulting triangles. Not always at the first try. Then, by extending some of the cuts to the edge of the card, the walls can be snapped out, ready for assembly. Going back to the Photoshop drawing, I now use a little trick to represent the windows. Rather than use overscale plastic, expensive custom-made etches, or scribed glazing bars, I put printed representations of the bars and the curtains behind the glazing material, a trick that seems to work quite well in this small scale. Using the grey rectangles as a guide, I first block in the glass areas on a new Photoshop layer. When I switch off the layer with the grey rectangles, you can see the windows starting to appear. I add long curtains and nets, and then I make some prints of the result. Laying on one of the prints is a piece of glazing material cut using the print as a guide. Bottom left is a plasticard wall, and to its right the printed windows cut like the glazing just under the size of the walls. Before assembling the walls, I glue together the plasticard, the glazing and the printed windows, and add the doors and some other details. As soon as the walls are assembled, I line the model with 5mm foam board. Next, I make a start on the roof structure. Building the chimney stack into the model makes it less vulnerable to damage than simply sticking it to the completed roof. I've shaped the ridge so that the roof will appear to have a slight sag, giving the cottage an appearance of age. I need the roof to fit around the stack and the dormer windows, so I make some trials using paper, making marks where adjustments need to be made. Then I tape the paper template to a piece of plasticard and cut round. I keep the template as it'll be needed again. Here, all the roofs are in place, ready to be covered with printed tiles. These are derived from photos of real roofs in the area being modelled. Some cloning in Photoshop and vertical stretching of the image gives a large enough area. When printing, I always use the printer manufacturer's own inks, as these are less likely to fade than the cheaper alternatives. The template is used again, this time to guide the cutting of the printed tiles. Ridge tiles are added, glued on with Pritt stick and shaped over the ridge. Flashing around the chimney stack is newspaper, which I'd earlier soaked with grey watercolour. Gutters are another potentially weak part of the model. I make them from black plasticard, first rounding what will be the underside of the outer edge, then cutting them to width. I make them wide enough to allow them to be cemented to the walls, but then narrow down the ends and where they pass the dormers. I make them a bit over scale to keep them as robust as possible. Gutters in place, and I do a bit more painting. Then I fabricate the downpipes. I've used wire here, but I've also tried plastic rod on other models. I make a temporary base so that I can see the intended ground level. The doorsteps are just 3 pieces of 30 thou plasticard, and I also make a porch, again covering the roof with printed tile paper. After protecting the roofs with a coat of artist's quality matte varnish, which will add some UV protection, I add a climbing plant using some strands of the material used for padding soft toys, and then add Woodland Scenics scatter. The model is now ready to be installed on the layout, and its garden is developed around it. The flowers are homegrown, small clumps of static grass with coloured scatter glued to the tops. The gravel path is fine sand, the concrete one just painted. The fencing is a commercial product, and as a final touch, a couple of figures stand either side of the fence having a chat, thus completing this little scene.